welcome to another jolly evening at the Robinson Building Auditorium. Here we are with another Liar's Bench. I'm Pam Meister, Director of the Mountain Heritage Center, and although, as you know, our exhibits and offices are over at Hunter Library, we are thrilled to still have access to this auditorium so that we're able to facilitate programs like we're having tonight. Wanted to mention to you that we do some programs over in our library space, which is right on the bottom floor, right next to the street, next to Java City. Next Thursday, a week from today, we are having a poplar bark basket making workshop that is really fun. We do this every year at this time because this is the season when the poplar saplings are ripe. So we have a naturalist / biologist, Jeff Gottlieb, who actually chops down a few saplings and brings them to our gallery where he will teach participants how to peel the bark off the tree and then to make bark baskets. And so you will walk out of this workshop with a very nice bark basket. Good news is it's a lot easier than doing woven baskets. So, you know, just a little knife work, really lacing things up. And it's a fun and instructive evening, so we hope you'll join us. You can sign up online if you like to do that. Just go to the WCU website and then search for Mountain Heritage Center, and there's a page which will give you a link where you can sign up online. Or if you don't care for that kind of tech stuff, just call the Mountain Heritage Center, 227-7129, and our wonderful office manager will get you signed up for the workshop. It's $35, which includes all the materials. So we hope you'll join us for that, and stay tuned for other exciting summer things. Gary and I were just talking about the next Liar's Bench, which we hope will be the third Thursday in June. However, we do now have to get the auditorium approved by folks up on the 5th floor here, so I will have to check that date, but keep your eye peeled for the newspaper. That's what we're hoping for. If we can't get that date, we'll get a different one. So I will shut up and get the show on the road, and we are thrilled once again to have Gary Carden and the Liar's Bench.
Well, that's certainly good timing. She went home to get my clipboard, which has got everything we're going to do on it tonight, which is very simple, and I could have probably remembered it without the clipboard, but I'm one of those people that have to have order and have to have everything written down. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to let Paul do the first song, and he's done the first song for about 4 years, I guess, haven't you? Yeah. And after that, Lloyd is going to tell 2 Cherokee stories tonight, and then after that, William Ritter is going to assist me in talking about Eddie West a bit, and we may even have some contributions from the audience for that. Yeah. We want to break after William sings. William has written a song that I'm eager for you to hear. He's written a lot of things I'm eager for the world to see. And one of the things he did, he wrote it for my play, Outlander, when it was done in Asheville. And of course, it was definitely the best thing in the show. And I want him to do it tonight for you, in addition to the fact that he is also going to assist me with Eddie West. Do I have any questions or anything before I start? Okay.
Gary,
Yes.
would you speak just a word about the Liar's Bench, where you had that made or where it comes from?
Oh. Well, I can go off running now for 2 or 3 hours. No, at one time in the Southeast, I don't know what it was like other places, but in the Southeast, there was a liar's bench in every small town in the United States. And the people sitting on it, that sort of distorts things when you call it a liar's bench, because it's more important than that. There's usually a bench in every small town, and in a lot of them it's still there, in front of the post office, or in front of the grocery store, or in front of the church. But it is where people go and sit who don't have any other place to go. That's what it amounts to. And if you're an old fella and they don't seem to have room for you at home, and you irritate them by your presence, and you sit on the liar's bench. And if you are a businessman who has lost his business and gone broke, you come and sit on the liar's bench. And if you're a soldier, maybe you were wounded, lost an arm or a leg, something bad happened to you. Maybe it's all in your head, but you are here, sitting on the liar's bench. And they sit here each day, these old fellows, not always old fellows, sometimes young fellows, and they tell each other stories. And sometimes the stories are true, and sometimes they aren't. I think the first storyteller was probably Jason, the Argonauts. You know, he went on that horrendous journey, raging seas and crazed women and stone soldiers pursuing him, and went through tragic love affairs with a half a dozen women, and then brought a dangerous woman home who killed a lot of people. Well, he's a perfect example. Suddenly, he wasn't anybody, and that bothered him. That bothered him. He wanted to be famous again. So he pulled his old ship up on the beach, and he put a bench by it, and he sat there. And when people would come by, he'd say, hey, yeah, come over here. Let me tell you a story. My name's Jason. Let me tell you the story of Jason and the Argonauts. And it got to people avoided him. They went another way, so they wouldn't have to talk to Jason. Well, Jason made the sad mistake of upsetting his evil wife, who was Medea. And before she left town, after she had destroyed his life, she says, "Go down to your ship Argo, that rotting hulk that's gone apace and rot there on the stands. Put you a bench there and sit. One of these days, one of the planks will fall on your head and kill you." And that's how he died. And he was right in the middle of a big lie that nobody wanted to hear. Well, regardless, you know, that's come down to us all the way. From Greek mythology to First World War and Second World War. We had a thriving liar's bench in Silva. And when I was a little chap, I used to walk up past it every day. It was the old post office in Silva. And there these guys sat. There was one huge fella, fat. He had a spit can. And then there was a guy that was very nervous. And then there was one that slept all the time. That was a very varied outfit sitting on that bench. And they got bored. If it rained, they went to the barber shop. But otherwise, they sat here and tormented people. And they loved to get little kids and people from Florida. And I would come. Here comes little Gary, and one of them says, "Hey, big spit can. Kid, come here. Kid, listen. I've got these nails in my pocket. I'm going to give them to you. You see, I have 5 nails here. They're all for the left side of the house. I I need right-sided nails. I want you to go down to the hardware store and get them, you know. So here I go, and everybody's in on it. And when you get to the hardware store, the guy says, I'm fresh out, I'm sorry. Come back Friday. Oh, you might try that other hardware store 2 blocks down. And finally somebody would take pity on me and they say, son, they messing with you. Go on back. And so I go back and, you pulled a trick on me. He said, I'm sorry about that, kid, I really am. I couldn't resist. I didn't do you no harm, though, did I? No. Here, listen, I'll give you a quarter. Here's a quarter. And one other thing you could do for me. You see this piece of wood I got here? I sawed this piece of wood this morning. And it needs to be 6 inches longer. And, you know, it's too short. So I tell you, go down to the hardware store and tell them that you want to borrow the board stretcher. You know, and so here I go again. I admired those guys. And all the stories they told were not comical or self-serving. Sometimes they were heartbreaking. Lots of different information coming from the liar's bench. I remember I was going by one cold morning, and that guy says, hey kid, I bet you think it's cold. Well, yes, I do. It's pretty cold, yeah. This ain't nothing. I tell you that I remember a morning when it was so cold that I decided to go hunting, and when I stepped off the porch, my shadow froze to the ground. Oh, yeah, that's right, kid. Froze to the ground. Well, I went on hunting. Went out in the woods. There's some squirrels out there. I heard them running up there in the trees, you know, and so I got my gun and I cocked it, and my dog started barking. But you know, when they barked, their barks froze. Snowball come out of their mouth. Another snowball. Next thing you know, there's a pile of snowballs there on the ground. Ridiculous. Well, I wasn't getting anywhere. Dog was barking, screeching. I just started shooting anyway. Well, every shot turned into a snowball. Big one. Rolled around on the ground. Well, I used all my ammunition, and I decided, well, the hell with this. So I went home, and when I got back to the house, you know, I picked my shadow up. He was laying there shivering, and I took him on the house. It stayed behind the stove until March. That's the story, and he likes for you to say, well, I gotta go now. And he says, okay, bye. And he says, except for one thing. And you turn around and come back, and he says, way up in April, I was sitting on the porch, and I hear, bam, 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 bam. It's all them shots that I fired back when we went squirreling. And the game warden showed up and got me for hunting out of season. Well, okay, let me get on with it. First performer we've got tonight is Paul Rusi. He's going to do Miller's Cave. I asked him whether he was going to do Roy Acuff version or Hank Snow version. And he said he was going to do the bluegrass version. He said it was different. He didn't know how good it was. Any of you know Miller's Cave? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. I'm glad we're keeping these vital songs alive. This is an old murder ballad, and I always loved them. Now, my grandfather did too. This one took place in what? Waycross, Georgia? Wicked country down there.
Georgia, through the swamps and the Everglades. There's a hole in the high mountain. God help the man who gets lost in Miller's Cave. I had a girl from way across Georgia, but she had unfaithful ways. Made me feel I wasn't wanted, like the bats and the bears in Miller's Cave. I couldn't stand the way she did me. Couldn't take her low down ways. Couldn't be like the bats and the bears in Miller's Cave. I called her out one Sunday morning with a man that called me name. Meanest man in Waycross, Georgia. I'd rather fight a mountain lion than Miller's Cave. I said, you'll pay both you and baby. I said, you'll pay both you and baby. I said, you'll pay both you and baby. I must see you in your grave. They laughed at me and then I shot them. I took their cheek and stealing both Miller's Cave. That woman made me feel unwanted, but I showed her I was brave. A wanted man in the state of Georgia will never fight because I'm lost in Miller's Cave.
You got a line or two, didn't you?
Yeah,
Well, I take it those lines fascinate me anyway. What's that? But I showed her I was brave.
yeah.
Oh, that fascinates me. I met her out one Sunday morning, and she was with Big Dave,
Big day.
and they laughed at me,
Yeah.
and so I shot them. That I understood, yeah. Good old murder ballads, I love those things. Okay, I guess it's time for the Cherokee storyteller. He's one of my favorite people. He's been telling stories a long time now. Let me ask you, the doors on the old hospital in Cherokee, not on the new hospital, but on the old Cherokee, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a very ornate carving on those doors. And I think maybe it was done by, who was that guy?
I don't know.
Well, who was the husband and wife, and he carved and,
Going back to Toski.
that's who it was. Chiltowski.
Yes.
And that's Silu, the corn maiden.
Yes.
Right, right. And she's the woman that gave the Cherokees corn, right?
Yes.
And the way she gave it to them, she asked them to kill her. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they chopped her up and sewed her, and corn grew. Is that a normal process? That's the kind of story that they gave you corn, and it cost them their lives to do so. Do the other people do that too? What about strawberries? I'll leave it.
Yeah, the people who really give us problems nowadays are the IRS.
Well, the Irish poured the fire a lot.
Well, I've had too many strokes since the last time I appeared with you, and I'm in the process of recovering. I've got some breath control problems. So during the story, if I pause and I just have to get my breath, I don't get excited about that. If I'm laying on the floor, that's a different matter.
Yes.
Long ago, the Cherokee met a people from the east, and they lived in peace with them for a while, and then they started arguing. And finally, the leaders of the people from the east and the leaders of the Cherokee met, and they sat, and they argued for 7 days and 7 nights. And the entire time they were arguing, they were smoking the pipe. And the Creator looked down on these men sitting there arguing and smoking the pipe, and was angry, because we were not supposed to smoke the pipe until we made peace. And here they were arguing and smoking the pipe. And the Creator was dissatisfied with them. He decided to make an example of them. He turned them all into grayish-looking plants we now call Indian pipes, and made them grow wherever friends or relatives have argued. And the smoke from the pipe that was to carry our prayers to the Creator. The smoke was made to lay over the mountains, and it would stay there until man learned to live in peace with all of their brothers and sisters. And that was how the Great Smoky Mountains came to be. Going to share another story with you. I have a question I want to do before I do this story. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to shove this in there. I want you to use your imagination, and let's go back several hundred years. You're a Native American. You know the song of every bird in the forest. You know the sound the fox makes when there's mice in the tall grass. And you go into the forest, you hear a sound you've never heard before. You look out on this clearing, and there you see a creature that's taller than you are. It's making a second sound you've never heard before. And as you watch, this creature separates in two. Each part moves around. Then it comes back together again and goes off to the forest, making two sounds you've never heard before. You go back to the village and tell them what you saw. A creature that's taller than you are, making two sounds you've never heard, separated, moved around, each part moved around, then came back together again and goes off to the forest, making two sounds you've never heard. And they don't say, yeah, you've been grazing on the happy grass again. The question, well, let me ask you first. Has anyone ever heard this? Anyone? Okay. The question they would have is, what was it? What I just described actually happened. It's not fantasy. It's not make-believe. It actually occurred. And with all of your knowledge, I ask you, what did I just describe?
Some kind of weird Bigfoot.
Horse and rider.
Pardon?
Horse and rider.
Oh.
Horse and rider. Until Columbus' third visit to the New World, we didn't have horses. And Queen Isabella of Spain agreed he would bring livestock on his third voyage. And horses were among the livestock. So we had never heard the whinny of a horse. We didn't have a knowledge of metallurgy. So we didn't know what two pieces of metal banging together sounded like, the metal of their armor. And when they got off the horse, it was separated. And then when he came back and got on the horse, they came back together again. I did this just to play with your mind. But very, very good. I've had two people. I've been asking this question for about 6 years. And two people got it. 17-year-old high school student. This lady sitting here. Excellent. Give her a hand. Now, in the old days, we had one tobacco plant, and we used tobacco for healing. And there was an elderly woman who, or people who take it sick, and the management went to see her. And when he examined her, he realized he could heal her with one leaf from the tobacco plant. And he asked his warrior to go bring back a leaf. And the warrior went in the forest, and he got to where the tobacco plant was, and all he found was a great big hole in the ground. He looked on the dirt around the hole. There he saw the tracks of geese. And in those days, geese were fierce warriors, and nobody wanted to fight with them unless they really had to. Well, the warrior went back and told the medicine man what he found. The medicine man called in the warriors, the wise men, the animals. He told them about the old woman being sick, and that he could heal her with one leaf from the tobacco plant. But the geese had dug up the tobacco plant and taken to the camp far in the south, and he asked for someone to bring back a leaf. Well, the deer said he would go. He traveled to the south, and he was very fast. It was long before he heard the geese because they're noisy then as they are today. He eased to the forest. He looked out on this large clearing, and he saw the geese were all around the clearing, and they had planted tobacco out in the middle, and they were guarding it. Well, the deer were running out, and he leaped over the geese, were charging out toward the tobacco plant. The geese gave the alarm call. Other geese came flying in from everywhere. They knocked the deer to the ground, and they killed the deer. And the medicine man knew when the deer had passed. And he called the warriors, the wise men, and the animals together again, and told them, deer is not coming back. And they all knew what this meant. And the medicine man asked for someone else to go. This time, Bear said that he would go. Well, he started traveling to the south. He was much slower than the deer, and it took him longer. But finally, he could hear the geese. He eased to the forest. He saw the clearing, the geese in a circle, and the tobacco plant out in the middle. He went charging out and knocked the geese aside, running out toward the tobacco plant. Again, the geese gave the alarm call. And again, geese came flying in from everywhere. They knocked the bear to the ground, and they killed the bear. And the medicine man knew when the bear had passed. And they called the wise men, the warriors, and the animals together a third time, and told them, bear is not coming back. And they asked for someone else to go. And this time, everybody was quiet. The deer, as fast as he was, had been killed. The bear, as big and as formidable as he was, had been killed. Then the little hummingbird flew up on the medicine man's finger, and he said, I will go. And they all looked at the hummingbird, and they started laughing. It's you. What can you do? And the hummingbird said, I will try. Does anybody else want to go? And everybody was quiet. And the hummingbird said, then I will go. And he flew to the south. He was very fast. It wasn't long before he could hear the geese. He flew up to a branch of a tree. He looked down, and he saw the circle of geese in the tobacco plant. Darted over the heads of geese, landed on the tobacco plant, looked around to see if the geese had seen him. Too busy talking, hadn't even noticed. He snipped off a leaf, some seed, and held it in his beak. Darted back over the heads of the geese, landed on the branch of the tree, stopped, looked around and see him. Still too busy talking. He flew north to the land of the Cherokee. He went to the medicine man, gave him the leaf and the seeds. The medicine man called in warriors. They gave each a warrior a seed and told him, go plant this throughout our land, so we will never want for our medicine again. Then he took the leaf, and he crumbled up, and he lit it. He blew the smoke across the old woman's face, and she was healed. And she lived for many more years sharing her knowledge with our people. There are many lessons in this story. I will talk about the lesson of the hummingbird. Too often, we will look at the shell that we all live in, and will decide what a person can or cannot do, simply by looking at this shell, and that is wrong. The hummingbird teaches us the shell is not important. What is important is what is in the heart.
The next thing I'd like to do is something I wanted to do for a long time. 4 or 5 years at least, and I always backed out. When I first came to Western as a student, I I was a pathetic little wretch, little mountain kid. Day student. More despised than lepers. Day students. And we all rode together in the same car, and we brought a bag lunch, ate it in the back seat of the car and went home. I figured out pretty quick that half of college, if not more, was living in the dorm. And I wasn't living in the dorm. I was going home where my grandmother ran me crazy, making me do chores. And so I decided to come up here and find a job, and I got a job in the cafeteria and ended up in, actually had a dormitory room, and suddenly I was a real college student. That was my impression. 7 miles from home. But I had this strange air of exoticism. I was so far away from Silva, all my friends in the pool room. One night I ran into Hetty West. Those of you who do not know, Hetty West, who is a noted folk singer and made quite a name for herself back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. She was sitting on a table outside the townhouse singing. And I never had a lick of sense when it came to women, and I was suddenly madly in love with Hetty West. I worried her to death. She really despised the sight of me. I followed her everywhere she went, and she was a nice person. She tolerated me. She's extremely intelligent. And eventually, I learned that she had a father who came to see her occasionally. And I remember one occasion when we were at the townhouse, which was, the great cafe to us. I was there, gawking at Hetty, as always, sitting across the booth, staring at her. And her father came in. Don West. Now, if you do not know, Don West is notorious. He was a labor organizer. He was also an active communist. And he comes in and sits down and starts talking, and I'm immediately fascinated by him. Hetty is not fascinated by him. It becomes apparent to me that maybe she doesn't even like her daddy, but she did. There was a reason for that, I guess. But Don West, I think I amused him, and he would give me books to read. They were all bad books, made me read dangerous stuff. Eugene Debs and Altgeld and the dangerous people in politics and so on and so forth. On and on and on. And I was sitting there one day, he had just given me a volume of his poetry, and it was always published in rough paper, and it was always, workers arise, the day is coming, which is his message to all of the poor workers in the South. And a guy came in with a suit in and sat down at the counter, and Don punched me and said, Gary, you see the man at the counter? I said, yeah. He says, that's an FBI agent. I said, how do you know? He says, well, he's been assigned to me. He goes everywhere I go. You see, I cause them a lot of trouble, so they watch me all the time. I thought that was wonderful to have. Really? He says, yeah, sure. Roger? And the guy in the suit, turned around and said, "Hey, Don." He knew him. Well, I believed him, one way or the other. I remember not long after that, Hetty got on a jungle gym across from the townhouse. And I remember the jungle gyms that used to be right across from the townhouse. She hung from the jungle gym over there. And I took note of the fact that she didn't shave her legs. Which alarmed me and amazed me and fascinated me. I didn't know another single female that didn't shave her legs. Everybody, you know, they were lacquered and slick. And there was Hetty, my hirsute love, hanging on this jungle gym with the hairy little legs. Well, we were in plays together. She absolutely adored one person at Western, and that was Dr. Renfro. Spoke highly of him. She had friends. She sang in the church choir. A friend of mine told me that she always took a novel to church so she could read during the sermon. That was the Hetty that we come to know. She's spunky, outspoken, did what she pleased. And the day came when she just loaded up and left. She wanted nothing to do with Western Carolina Teachers College anymore. I don't know whether it's, have you got it? Yeah. Here's Hetty in the student center at Western. She used to be in the basement of Joyner. And we had our first black student. And naturally, everybody shied away from her, except Hetty. Hetty goes straight and becomes her best friend and goes everywhere with her. I think, maybe, this lady's in the audience, am I right?
That's Kitty Dixon.
Huh?
That's Kitty Dixon.
I thought it was you.
No.
Looks like the back of your head. But there is no doubt about it, you were a good friend to Hetty West, weren't you?
Roommate for 2 years.
She finally left and went on, and we heard things about her, and of course she recorded things. This, of all things, she's with Bob Dylan here in this show. It's one of her early albums there. In a short time, she stopped recording in the United States and went to England. And for whatever reason, she was much more popular in England than she was anywhere else. And for whatever reason, when she died, and she died much too young, England declared the greatest living folk singer in England has just died. It's not a reputation she had in the United States. It was the reputation that she had in England. She worked with Lomax. She studied in Germany, I think, for 7 years. If I get started, it goes on and on and on and on. But let me say that there came a point in my life where, considering the fact that I had been once obsessed with Hetty, I started trying to track her down, calling people who knew her, friends that she had, and I didn't stop until I got her phone number. And I called her, and she answered. And I told her, "Hetty, this is Gary Carden." And she says, "Oh, for God's sake, I never did like you." Hurt my feelings terribly. And she went on and claimed she thought you were hot stuff, didn't you? I remember you in the drama. And I asked her about her father, and she said, "I don't want to talk about him. He made life miserable for my mother and for me, and I have trouble forgiving him for that." And I said, yeah, I know, you were always moving from one place to the other, as best I remember. Well, you don't know anything about it. You don't know anything about my life. To hell with you. And she hangs up. Well, I bled a lot and whimpered and stayed up late and felt sorry for myself. But about a week later, she called me and she said, Gary, I'm sorry, I had you mixed up with somebody.
That's a good lie.
And I was delighted, but she says, don't let it go to your head. I didn't like you particularly anyway. You weren't who I thought you were, and you told me that lie about the FBI agent, and maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe it really was an FBI agent that followed Daddy everywhere he went. And she says, I'm making a comeback. And I said, that's wonderful. I'm going to New York. I think that I had tracked her to Long Island. And she says, I'll be in touch. I'll tell you more. I'm going right back on the coffee club circuit again. And the next thing I knew, she was dead. Bam. So quick. So quick. Of course, what I'm left with is, why were we such a disappointment to her? And we were. Western Carolina Teachers College, I guess we were too provincial, too everyday, and her life was in a terrible mess anyway, and she was always angry. But I have asked William to play the song that she's most well known for recording. It is William's version. It's not the Peter, Paul, and Mary version.
Oh, Lord, no.
So he's going to do 500 miles.
Do you want to sit down?
Huh?
Do you want to sit down?
Yeah, you can sit down. You don't need to sit down.
Oh, I thought you might want to sit down.
Okay. You come over here.
All right. So if you grew up listening to this song, or it's a big hit, and you know every word, don't hold it against me if I get a little garbled up or doing a little bit different. This song is sort of a reimagined, I guess, from a very, very old song, family of tunes that come out of the black tradition called Reuben. And Hetty learned some fragments of this from, I believe it was her aunt or someone in her immediate family, and then she took it and made this grandmother, and sort of put her own sort of spin on it. And I'm sure she wrote some of the lyrics in here, but I can't tell which. I wouldn't. They're so well done that you wouldn't be able to tell them from the old ones. So, anyways, here's a little bit of 500 miles. My version of her version. If you miss the train I'm on, you won't know that I am gone. Can't hear the whistle blow 100 miles. 100 miles, 100 miles, 100 miles, 100 miles. You can hear the whistle blow 100 miles. If my honey said so, I won't railroad no more. Said I'll sidetrack my engine and go home.
I could tell her she'd better come along and go with me. Go with me, go with me, go with me, go with me. She'd better come along and go with me. And my clothes are all warm and my shoes are all torn. Lord, I can't make a living this way. This away, this away, this away, this away. Lord, I can't make a living this way. If my train runs right, I'll be back tomorrow night. I'm coming down the line, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9. For I'm coming down the line, number 9. Not a shirt on my back, not a pen to my name. Lord, I can't go back home this way. This away, this away, this away, this away. Lord, I can't go back home this way. If you miss the train I'm on, you won't know that I am gone. You can hear the whistle blow 100 miles, 100 miles, 100 miles, 100 miles, 100 miles. You can hear the whistle blow 100 miles.
I don't know how many people there are in this auditorium or in this state or in this county who remember Hetty West, but I know that Norma Jean Welch remembers it. Would you like to say anything?
Well, I would like to say that I've heard that song at 3 o'clock in the morning several times. I was ready for 2 years in college. And so it's, you did a nice job in there.
Thanks.
She was a good friend.
Thank you.
Are there any recordings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
yeah.
Of her,
You can get it on YouTube.
there's an awesome number of recordings, and they're selling for a fortune on wherever that place is where you buy records now, you know. Her records really bring a high price. She was considered England's greatest folk singer. And when I did research on her, I kept being bewildered by little things like, for a while she dated and almost married Roger Zelazny. Well, Roger Zelazny writes science fiction. I had read several books, but I never, well, good heavens, how many other strange things like that, you know. And she had a life apart in Germany. I think she was there 7 years, wasn't she? I was in class where Hetty got thrown out of class. She would take exception to something the instructor said. And not only would she correct him, but when he resented being corrected, she cited, you know, volume and page. If you will consult so-and-so, you'll find you're wrong. And our instructors at Western Carolina Teachers College didn't appreciate that. Upset them. She was going to play for me, but I don't think she paid any attention to me. She did her part and went on, you know. But I stayed obsessed with her father for a long time. He hasn't been dead long. He went up into Pipestone,
Pipestone,
I stayed west.
Popstem,
West Virginia.
Pipestone, West Virginia. He once had,
It's still there.
it's still there.
Yeah.
Folks like
He
that.
had another one here and somebody burned it.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah, the Klan often visited him, and they burned his farm once, and killed his animals. I've got, you know, his biography. He's one of the most fascinating people
Yeah.
I've ever read about. I can't leave it alone, but there's not an awful lot of people who seem to be interested in him. Who are you?
I'm Victoria Biley. I wrote my dissertation on Don West.
Wow.
Before he died, spent a lot of time years with him, talking about his life.
Was it him or the guy he founded?
Miles Horton. and he-
Miles Harden.
Yeah, founded the
Yeah, the Howland Center.
Highland Center.
Okay, Miles Horton. It's either Hetty's father or Miles Horton. They told me this story and I forgot which one it happened to. They were starting a labor union in, I think, maybe Blue Ridge, Georgia. And the guy came to the motel where they were staying and called Don out and said, "We'd like for you to catch the bus out in the morning and here's your ticket." And Don said, "Sorry, I can't go." And they grabbed him and cut his finger off, first joint. And I always admired Don West for, he looked at the joint gone from his finger and he said, "Well, on second thought, gentlemen, I believe I can go." Well, you get started on those stories and they just go on, particularly the Miles Horton stories and the Highlander Center.
You know,
Which
Martin
is
Luther
where
King and other
Martin
civil
Luther
rights
King ended
activists,
up,
Right.
yeah.
would meet there playing the civil rights movement.
Right, okay. William has written a remarkable song, and I'd like for him to play it for you. He wrote it for my play, which was Outlander, which was done twice, 3 times, 4 times in Asheville. They just kept doing it over there. That's nice, because nobody else will do it. He wrote a song for that particular play because it has a sort of tribute to the woods and trees and what this country was like before we ruined it. You know. And of course the play was basically about Horace Kepler. But it was specifically about the ruination of the environment here to an extent that it was just frightening. Now, William has written a song about trees. When I heard it, I thought of the big ones, of course, the hickory, and the ones that went down the hardest. But there's a young man here in the audience who has written a book about that tree. And if he would, I'd like for him to come down here and read a passage out of his book about the nature of the trees. You can come up here. Folks, this is Matthew Baker. Okay.
Sit down.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you.
Today, when I look out at the beautiful mountains around us, the green of spring, I'm reminded that this is God's country and some of the most beautiful scenery in the whole wide world. But as I look out around, there's one very important thing missing from these scenes of green and from the woods. Does anybody have any idea what that is?
Yes.
The American chestnut. Once the American chestnut stood tall and proud. It's possible then to look from one of the high balls and see the cream-colored blossoms of the chestnut tree rolling in the wind. And there was a reason for that. The majesty and the power of that tree often stood more than 100 feet high. 100 feet high. Beautiful white blossoms. At its base, I've been told it could be up to 12 feet wide. Wide. Now imagine this room, a tree 12 feet wide, and then its circumference would take up most of this room in space. Absolutely incredible. Something that I regret I've never been able to see. Now, has anybody in this room ever heard the term, he had a burr in his saddle? Have you heard that? Any idea where that came from? The burr of the chestnut was razor sharp. It held 4 or 5 wonderfully sweet chestnuts. Now, to a man that tied his horse up at the hitching post, went in the store to trade, and left his horse out, and heard his horse neighing very loudly. And when he walked out, he found out that an enemy of his had put a burr under that 10 or 12 pound saddle. And he indeed found that the horse had a burr in his saddle. Now, the American chestnut tree, as Gary knows, had a close relationship with the Appalachian people and the culture. For one, it was very useful. The uses this tree had, I could go on for hours, but medicine, many people took the leaves of the chestnut, boiled them, and took the juices and used them as a remedy for swelling. The chestnuts had a very sweet taste. People often used them in cooking and in pies. Many, many uses. But to the lumber industry, which was vital to this area and the economy, they were like gold. Imagine in 1900 if you were a timber bearer and somebody in the timber industry. Trees stood more than 100 feet tall. Often for the first 65 feet of that tree, there were no limbs, no knots, straight as a gum burner. You could take that straight to the mill and cut your wood from it. Absolutely amazing. Now, the other feature of the chestnut, as a lot of people probably know, it was acid wood, which means that it was highly resistant to pests or any kind of rot or decay. Many of the old structures, such as late friend of mine, Frank Cargill's cabin, is over 100 years old, but it's in absolutely perfect shape because of that wood does not decay, and it stayed in such good shape. Yes, the chestnut was almost indestructible. Notice I said almost. But if Superman had kryptonite, the American chestnut tree had a blight called Endophia parasitica. It came into New York and was discovered in 1904 on seedlings that came in from China. It worked its way south about 50 miles a year, killing every tree in its path. And it landed in Jackson and Macon County in the 30s. So from its path north, south, all the territory, many, many millions of these magnificent trees, 100 feet tall, 12 feet wide, beautiful, were destroyed. One of the largest, worst natural disasters, I guess you would call it, ever in this country. But one thing I want you to remember, the chestnut tree, very resilient and very tough. And today, if you walk through the woods at the right time, often you'll see a stump, just a stump of an old chestnut. And it shoots forth trees and branches, 10 or 15 feet in the air, only to be killed again by the blight. So, it is my prayer that one day the chestnut tree will win its long, hard battle, fight off that blight and that fungus. And once again, my children and grandchildren will be able to stand on a high mountain and see that tree in all its majesty and the cream-colored blossoms of the tree rolling and swaying in the wind. That's my prayer that that will one day happen. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to sing the song?
Yes, I do.
Right now?
Yeah, let's do it right now.
After the trees come back.
I can do it later.
No, I'm just,
No.
go ahead.
I don't have your clipboard, so I don't know.
Huh?
Didn't know the schedule.
Yeah. No, you just give me the signal and I'll.
Go for it.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, so I wrote this song for Gary's play. We had a lot of fun over there in Nashville doing it with the Autumn Players. And one thing I've often thought about with the blight, as I'm sure it brought a lot of devastation, but I've also wondered if we hadn't so powerfully timbered this country, basically the eastern seaboard, so much. I wonder, certainly wasn't the only thing against it was the blight. And if there were any trees that maybe had some kind of natural resistance, we might have cut them down thinking they were going to die, or we might have cut them down before the blight even got here. Great big poplar reaching towards the sky. Big yellow blooms in April, big green leaves in July. And it's been there since great granddaddy's time, when he cleared in a patch of new ground. But the lumbermen came, we old taxes, so they hauled the old girl down for floorboards in some rich man's town. Great big chestnut made it through July, letting loose chestnuts in autumn, springtime flowers snow white. And it's been there since great granddaddy's time, when he cleared in a patch of new ground. But the lumbermen came, we old taxes, so they hauled the old girl down for floorboards in some rich man's town. Great big white oak rising above the tree, looking down on God's creation, dancing in the breeze. And it's been there since great granddaddy's time, when he cleared in a patch of new ground. But the lumbermen came, we old taxes, so they hauled the old girl down for floorboards in some rich man's town. Great big mountain, naked, running red, stump salt way to the rich lime tombstones for the dead. And it's been there since great granddaddy's time, when he cleared in a patch of new ground. But the lumbermen came, we old taxes, so they hauled the old girl down for floorboards in some rich man's town.
sit on the bench because I'm having trouble. I would like to, there you go. I would like to point out that I'm not going to be the master of ceremonies for the Liars Bench after tonight. This young man is taking it next month in June. I told stories once in Franklin, 30 years ago. Richard Chase was there. You know, Richard Chase, famous storyteller. And we were sitting backstage, and there was some storyteller on out there that it was a woman all dressed up. She had rubber warts all over her face and singing silly songs, and people were really laughing, fantastic laughing, you know. And I said, wow, she's really good. And Richard Chase gave me a look that just withered me. Any fool can make them laugh. Can you make them cry? And I've always remembered that. Can you make them cry? Most people don't want to cry. But he was implying that it was some sort of standard that meant something. I got married too soon. I was just out of college and teaching, and I thought I was hot to trot. I got engaged to a very nice, beautiful young woman from Rising City. And I taught one terrible year in Haywood County, but it was soon over, you know. I had 40 students and only 20 seats, and everything you could think of that was wrong was wrong. You know, there were students in the class far bigger than I was. They called me Little Teach. Little Teach. And no, I looked up and I got a job in Georgia, and it was a dream job. It was everything. It was, would you consider coming down and directing drama for us? Oh, wow. Would you possibly consider teaching English literature and American literature? Oh, my God. You know, you go years before you get this, because the high school hierarchy is constructed in such a way that it awards that to the teachers who have been there the longest, of course. So my new bride and I moved, and I gave her a job in the office of the superintendent, and we were set. And I had an excellent class. I had 20 college prep students. My goodness. We did theater, did glass menagerie. Wow! Went and won the state. I had it made. I had a world cut out for me. I had a place to teach for the rest of my life. But I did notice that my new wife was preoccupied. And I did notice that she didn't sleep well. And that she got up at night sometimes and walked endlessly back and forth through the house. And one night she got a shock because she was looking out the window, and one of the local football team boys looked in at her. Shook her up, you know. Well, I got all He-Man and went to town the next day and bought a gun. Brought the gun back and put it in the desk by the drawer, you know, by the bed. Now, let him come back. You know. Well, a couple of nights later, I woke up and the lights were on, which was peculiar. And I looked around, and my wife was sitting cross-legged in the center of the bed with my new pistol. And she had it cocked. And she was pointing it at me. And I became very sensitive. You never have seen such a sensitive husband as I was. I thought, is something wrong here? Could we talk about it? And little by little I got that gun away from her. And she says, I can't explain it. I just decided, I woke up and I decided I would shoot you and shoot myself. And it did occur to me, why are you including me? You know? Why did I deserve this? You know? But no, I took the gun back to the store. They gave me my money back. But my wife continued to behave in a strange way. She would hide from me. I would come home and couldn't find her. Look all over the house for her. Look in the bedroom for her. I would frequently find her in the clothes closet standing behind the clothes. Now that can get you, you know. Boom, there she is. Made me alert, you know. We had dirty clothes piled in the laundry room. I remember once I looked for her for 2 hours and found her under the dirty clothes in the laundry room, you know. And I said her name was Lucinda. I've always liked her name. Lucinda means bringer of light. I said, what's wrong, Lucinda? And she says, I don't know. We went home occasionally and her mother took me aside and told me that Lucinda had been in therapy for several years when she was in high school. And she says, I felt guilty about not telling you all of this before you all got married because by all rights you should have known about it. And of course I said, well, it doesn't make any difference. You know, love conquers all. Doesn't make a difference to me. I love my little wife. I went back and she bought a car. I didn't know what she was doing. She became very secretive and she had saved enough money from that little job that she had. She quit the job and she began to drive aimlessly. And sometimes she would drive the car all the way into South Georgia someplace. And she would go until the gas ran out of the car. And then she would talk to someone and someone would call and I would go get her. And I didn't know what we were going to do. I was completely bewildered. It was Thanksgiving. We decided to go home for Thanksgiving. And I decided that a lot more than that, we needed to do a lot of talking with her parents when we got home, you know. And she had been missing for 2 days. And when we found her, I hadn't slept in a good bit, but we got in the car, packed it with more stuff than we needed, and went to Bryson City for Thanksgiving. Now, just outside Blue Ridge, Georgia, there's a little drive-in place. I think it was called the Rebel then. And I stopped there for coffee. And Lucinda was just sort of very still and stared out the window. But when we backed out, she says, wait, you must be exhausted. Wait, let me drive. I said, okay. And so we changed places and she got under the steering wheel and we left Blue Ridge, Georgia, and we approached a little community outside on the road to Murphy that wasn't much there. It was just a general store and a post office and a bridge. And when you topped up the top of the hill, it was like a ski slope went down to that bridge. And when we topped up the top of the hill and there was the bridge, you know. she put her foot on the gas, and the next thing I knew, we were going 60, and then we were going 70, and it was 75, and I looked at her, and she winked at me, and we hit the bridge. It was an impressive wreck. I had a 57 Chevrolet in it. Beautiful thing with hook fins and so on and so forth. Well, it just wrapped around that bridge. It put her and me both up under the dash, and then it rolled on us. And the windshield came out. And when I came around, I had the windshield around my face, and I had to get it off of my face, you know. But I couldn't sit up. I was in the floorboard. And so I laid in the floorboard, and the car popped and cracked like something that is overheated, and you're expecting it to catch on fire any minute, you know. And all the glass broke out of the windshield and all out of the window on the driver's side, you know. And then it was just very quiet. And we laid there on the floorboard of that car, and I heard, He leadeth me, by God's own hand, He leadeth me, unnerved me. But then I could see it through the window. It was a tent. It was a revival. It was a tent meeting. They were singing, you know. It's been going up there all week, you know, and here's people going into that tent. And suddenly a voice says, well, they're both dead. And I saw an old guy and his wife standing in the window looking in the car, you know. And the woman said, no, the man there moved a little bit. And her husband says, well, he won't move long. I said, well, what are we going to do? He said, let's just walk over here. And of course they had payphones and, you know, the telephone booth. I thought my logic was he would go over there and call the hospital. That's not what he did. He called a funeral home. There's dead people down here. And then they went on to the tent meeting. And so here came the funeral wagon. You know. I didn't blow a siren. They figured that everybody was dead. They didn't need to do that. And so they got us out. It took a while. They had to cut some metal away, and they got us both out and laid us on the ground by the car. And then the guy says, these people are alive. He was upset. These people are alive. We're not supposed to handle living people. What are we going to do? Well, I don't know. And I said, please take us to the hospital. Oh, we can't take you to the hospital. That's not what we do. I said, get me my billfold out of my pocket. And he did. And I got a $20 bill out, and I said, please take us to the hospital. And he did. It was a Catholic hospital. They washed my face with a washcloth. That my face was full of glass from the windshield whopping around my head. And they scrubbed it. Oh. Made me very alert, woke me right up, you know. And they asked me for phone numbers and calls and so on and so forth. I give them all that, and they called Bryson City and said that we have 2 people in the hospital down here, and my father-in-law says, tell them we'll be there in the morning. And so I slept on the couch, but they had my wife in a bed upstairs. She was in worse shape, had a ruptured artery in her leg, had a scar coming down between her eyes. In later years, she wore bangs, you know, to cover up the scar. But there we were, and down came the father-in-law and loaded us in the car, and we went to Bryson City, and it was Thanksgiving Day. And we had turkey and dressing. And eventually I thought I needed to talk to my father-in-law. So I called him in the living room and I said, Sir, listen, the marriage is not working out. He says, what do you mean? I said, just like that, it's not working out. I said, well, for beginners, that accident was not an accident. She hit that bridge, on purpose. And he says, come out in the backyard. I can't talk to you here. Too many people overhearing us. Come on, get out of here. So we go out in the backyard and he's angry. And he says, now you listen to me. Very idea. You get Lucinda. And you get in that car and you get back to Georgia. And you teach your classes Monday morning. You hear? Monday morning. Honeymoon's over, I guess, huh? He says, you think I like it? My life's not any better than yours. Why do you think I go fishing every Friday and don't come back until Tuesday? He said, do we have an understanding? I said, I knew I was talking to a crazy man. And so I said, yes, we have an understanding. And so he went back in the house and slammed the door. And I did not go back in the house. I went around the house and up the driveway and walked out on Bryson City's main drag there by the bridge, and I said, and I thumbed myself out of there. I thumbed all the way to Banner Elk where I had a friend, and I sat in his living room and took little glass needles out of my skull for 3 days. But I didn't know what I was going to do. And the car was totaled. And everyone's advice was, well, why don't you go back to your job in Cartersville, Georgia? No, I'm not going back. I'm through with that. I don't want to do that ever again. And I said, well, you can't get a divorce in North Carolina if that's what you're thinking about. And I said, that's definitely what I'm thinking about. I said, well, that takes 2 years in North Carolina. Now, if you will go back and reclaim your residency in Georgia, you can get one in a year there, even less, maybe 9 months. To make a long story short, I went back to Georgia. I took some of the worst jobs I've ever had in my life. I worked in Atlanta and dishwasher. I worked in a trucking line. Record warehouse. That was pretty good. I liked that. But I took all the money and gave it to a lawyer, and that lawyer got me a divorce. And the last thing I was doing, we were filing the papers, and they were going back and forth. I was working in a record warehouse where I had to work until midnight, and I didn't mind. I didn't have any business. It was on Peachtree, right straight in front of the theater where Gone with the Wind was. And I would sit on a little stool that revolved there at night and watch the cars go back and forth, up and down the street. And I was sitting there one night and I noticed a woman across the street seemed to be looking at me. And it was raining and she had on a blue raincoat. And I thought that looked like Lucinda. And then she crossed the street and came in, and it was Lucinda. I said, what are you doing here? She says, we can still straighten this out. And I said, no, we ain't, no, we can't. You stay away from me. You stay away from me. I was afraid of her. I walked her up and down the street in Atlanta, and we went in cafes and drank coffee until daylight. I took her to the bus station and bought her a bus ticket. She didn't want to get on the bus, and I had to push her on the bus, and I had to ask the driver, keep her. And he pulled out. But she stopped in Fairmont and got a different bus and came right back. And the next morning I'm in my job and I look across the street and there is that blue raincoat again. She's standing across the street, and here she comes, and she comes in, and she's standing in the record shop, you know, and I was like, God, what am I gonna do? And I take her down to the bus station, and we sit together, and when the bus comes, I put her on the bus, and then I call her family, and I said, please keep her. When she left, I didn't feel that they would do that she might come back. So I quit my job. I took a different job. I moved to Cedartown, Georgia. I took a job teaching school. 9th grade, I'd take anything I could get. Life went on, and, you know, I forgot all of that, and then I ended up going to Lee's McRae and teaching for 5 years, and then I went to work for the Cherokees, and I taught worked 15 years for the Cherokee Indians, and everything seemed to be finally all right. She didn't go back. One night, 3 years ago, I got an email, and it was from a young man named Matthew Nicholson. I was hoping he would be here tonight. That would make up a good end to the story. And Matthew said, Gary, you don't know me, but I want to ask you a question. He says, my mother died recently, and we were going through our belongings, and we found your name and address, and I can't understand what the connection is with you. And I said, well, what was your mother's name? And he said, Lucinda. I said, she's dead. And he said, yes. She died a year ago. I said, Lucinda is your mother. He said, that's right. He says, why did y'all get divorced, if you don't mind asking? I said, your mother tried to kill me. He said, oh. And then he came to Silva, and he took me for lunch. And what is it? What's the restaurant in Silva where everybody?
Coffee shop.
Lulu's. Took me to Lulu's, and so every time he is an engineer and he works in Sweden, and every time he comes through town, he comes and takes me to dinner. That's not a story that you're accustomed to hearing, I realize, but that's my grown-up adult story. Thank you. Well, we're going to break, and on the break, there's some stuff for sale out in the lobby, but if you want to wait until after the next half of the show, you can do that, because everything will still be out there when the show is over. The next thing that's coming up, you know, of course, is Isla Hatter. I don't think I've had anybody in Liars Bench that had her following. That's amazing. When I let people know she was going to be here, I got 150 responses.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, how about, where are they though? They said they'd catch you later. But she is going to have the rest of this show for the rest of the night. I'd like to break for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then let's come right back, and when we do, it is totally Isla Hatter's show from here on out. We will pass that little basket there for money, and the money we get will determine what kind of show we have in June. So, you know, we would really appreciate it if you would drop wedding rings and anything else in there. Give us enough, because this show is free. Liar's Bench is free, and it's a little tough to run a show that is free like this with the quality of talent that we have. It's that simple. I'm going to stop being MC. I'm going to come back to the show, of course. But I'm not doing all that well. As my granddaddy used to say, I feel like somebody took me by the heels and trailed me against the barn. That's pretty accurate. Thank you. Come back in 15 minutes, please. Okay.
I'll shorten the number of stories. I won't shorten each story, but I'll shorten the number of stories that I was going to tell tonight. But I want to, since it is Gary's last night here, we talked about the possibility of me telling one on him. I'll tell the one that I know about Gary. He mentioned in his soliloquy about his life that he had worked 15 years for the tribe. Well, he was in, I believe, something like the finance department, where he was writing grants, which he had every high hope was going to come to pass. Oh yes, the money's coming, and it didn't. So at the same time, when he would attend tribal meetings, he knew that different people had been given a name in Cherokee. And he thought, well, I've been here so long in the tribe, why haven't you given me a name? You sure you want one? Well, of course. Well, nothing happened. Nobody came to him and said, well, we've, given you this wonderful title. And so one day in council, they were talking in Cherokee, and they kept pointing at him, and they kept saying the same name over again when they pointed at him. Oh, they've given me a Cherokee name. So after the meeting was over, he asked his friend in council, he said, you've given me a Cherokee name. Yes, we have. He said, well, what is it? He said, are you sure you want to know? Well, of course. What do you call me? And they said the name in Cherokee, which I don't remember, and I don't think Gary remembers exactly what it was, but this was the meaning, because he said, what does it mean? Well, if you must know, it means big wind, a lot of thunder, no rain. We need to find out how that's I would have said it for you tonight if I had known it. And the things that are out there in my the Roadside Rambles cookbook, which has 390 wild food recipes, there's copies of Women of the Smokies, which, surprise, surprise to me, of the 19 women that are in this book are women who influenced the Smokies or have been influenced by the Smokies, and I'm in that latter group. And in asking Courtney Licks about who some of the people were, I went, oh, I hiked with Margaret Stevenson, and I know this person and that person. Well, how nice that I'm in that group. And I said, who else? And she said, Dolly Parton. And I went, what? I'm in a book with Dolly Parton? You're kidding me. So when I told my husband, he said, well, you can retire now. You're in a book with Dolly Parton. And so I did. So I've been close to 30 years working in the park, but about 16 years working for the park. So yes, I'm definitely influenced by the Smokies. And are there any stories that are related to my work in the park? And yes, there is one. And it had to do with a day when we had, which coming up in June, is Women's Work at Oconaluftee Visitor Center. And I'm there dressed as the granny woman with the home remedy table. Well, park ranger came in to Linda Doucette, a head ranger, and all disturbed and said, I need somebody quick to go with me up the road because I just caught 3 Laotians with big cotton sack bags full of some kind of plant. And I don't know what to charge them with because we don't know what the plant is. And there's a difference in the fine, whether it's something you're going to resell or if it's something for food stuff. There's a difference. So he had to know, what it was. He didn't recognize the plant. And Linda said, oh, you're in luck, Isla's here, she knows all the plants. So they sent me up there. So I followed the park ranger, and he was up just past the Camp Park Farm Trail at the very next pullout. And there were these 3 Laotians, and sure enough, they had these huge cotton sacks full of, it was rattlesnake planting. Now, some of you know what that is. It's an orchid, but it's not an orchid that anybody would be paying money to have in their native plant garden. It's not that showy. They probably, we figured, well, they must believe the folklore about Appalachia that it's good for snake bite, because it looks like, the rattlesnake's back, or a snake's back anyway. So I got out and I told him, I said, well, this is definitely not for seasoning or food. And he said, well, that's what they were trying to tell me, that it was, for food. I said, no, it wouldn't be seasoning, they wouldn't be eating it. No, somebody's paying them, to gather this, but I can't imagine why. It turns out later we found out that Laotians are snake charmers, just like people in India. So that's why they were being paid to get this stuff. Would have been a lot of dead snake charmers if they'd sent it over there, probably. But about 3 months later, I ran into the park ranger and I said, oh, what happened with those Laotians? Did they show up in court? Yes, he said they did, and they had the $5,000 fine. We never did find out. He said who it was. He said we did have an interpreter, but they didn't have to tell who had paid them, and we couldn't get it out of them since they had the money and they paid the fine. So we never did catch that person, but he said they did have the money, they paid the fine. And he said something else turned up. He said they told the interpreter, we figured we'd better show up, pay the fine, because when that old granny woman got out of her car, we knew our goose was cooked. And I remembered I was dressed like this. Somebody, no, when I got out, they thought I was the real deal. They thought, well, that's it, game's over, we're cooked. So, and then there's stories, goodness gracious, there's so many. You never know when you're going to use a language that you've learned, even if it's a dead one like Latin. And when you're doing botany in particular, you learn Latin names for plants so you don't make mistakes. It can come in handy in the most unusual ways. And there was a story came to me, of some botanists that I knew, and a mutual friend told me this story that came from them. There were 3 botanists that were botanizing down in South America. I don't know which country, but let's just say it was the Amazon. And they were going further and further back, to see places that other botanists hadn't been. And eventually they started coming to villages where people kept coming out and pressing against them the new baby, or some new carving, or a sewing machine even, for them to touch it. And they looked at the guide, the interpreter, and said, what is this all about? And he thought a minute and he said, well, I know what it is. He said, you're dressed in khaki from top to toe. And he said, the only other person they see in khaki like that is the traveling priest. And he comes about every couple of months down this river, and he blesses, whatever new thing has come along in their lives. And they're expecting a blessing from you in Latin. And they said, well, we don't know any blessings in Latin. I said, well, you better come up with something, because, this could get ugly if you refuse to do it. So at the next village they stopped at, when they came running out with all their new stuff, they went, Sancta Rises Simplicissima, Verbascum Thapsus, used all the botanical plant names they could think of to bless the children. So, I haven't had to experience that myself, but I have it in the back of my head if I ever need it. And then I have 2 stories. You say that your life can be influenced by family stories. They kind of, have something to do with who you become. And everybody's got a tale that's come down, through the generations. And there's two in my family, and they're both plant stories. And one of them had to do with my mother as a young girl. And she said that they'd moved to a new farm. And since they hadn't had, crops growing, they were kind of gathering some wild stuff and bartering with neighbors. And so my grandmother sent my mother down to the fence row to gather some poke for supper. So while she's gathering poke, there's the neighbor's little boy, and he's hanging on the fence post, and the whole time she's picking, he's saying, sour poke, sour poke. And she says, well, I don't know how your mama fixes it, but it's not sour the way she cooks it at our house. She says, my mama cooks real good poke. And she just said, sour poke. So the next day, the neighbors, the little boy's mother, the neighbor, came over to greet my grandmother, and she said, well, we're mighty glad to have neighbors. We're sure glad that you rented this farm. But she said, I need to tell you, she said, when we moved in, there were a lot of things that we were familiar with that we liked that didn't grow here. So we planted a lot of seeds that we brought from the old place. And she said, we planted poke down by the fence. We don't mind sharing, but that's our poke. So he was trying to say, that's our poke, but he couldn't get the whole sentence out. So whenever we had poke in our house, Mother would say, well, it's sour poke for supper. And there's a story, this one has to do, I'm going to end with one on plants, but I'm going to interject one that if we ever had moth radio in Asheville, I would go to moth radio and I would tell this story. My mother took me to the lady that it happened to prove to me that it was true. Back in East Texas, in late hot summer, when it's 105 in the shade, the neighboring folks next to where my parents lived had a turkey farm. And they also, it was in the part of East Texas that they could have an apple orchard, which is not many places, but they had an apple orchard. So it was time to press and make the cider. And they finished with that and they put all the mash out for the turkeys to eat. Well, after a while, they looked out and turkeys were dead. And they said, oh my God, what are we gonna do? 100 dead turkeys. And it's not time for Thanksgiving. They were raising them for Thanksgiving and they were gonna, get them ready for the county freezer and then sell them for Thanksgiving. Well, we'll have to do it, a month or so early. So they called the neighbors on both sides. My parents were one of the couples. So the three couples got together and said, we'll do assembly line. Let's pluck them first, take a break, cool off, and then we'll go back and we'll gut them and clean them and get them ready for the county freezer. So, if anybody's ever plucked a chicken or a turkey, and hot water's involved and a lot of smell and, it's a pretty nasty job. So they got 100 turkeys all plucked. Thanks. And they went in the house, got some iced tea, they're cooling off, they're getting ready to fix some sandwiches and have a bite to eat and then get back and, do the rest of the deed. And somebody heard gobble, 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 gobble. And they said, oh my God, you're kidding me. They walked outside on the porch where they'd laid all these, and there were 100 turkeys waking up from a drunken stupor. Folks, that's drunk. If you go through a boiling water bath and you're plucked and you don't wake up, that's dead true. So then they had 100 turkeys then. What are we going to do? So they had to put them in the barn with lights so their feathers grew back in. And then they had to do the job all over again. When it came time to get them ready for Thanksgiving. They didn't get a reprieve, that was their business. And Mother said, you never saw such embarrassed turkeys in your life. And one of them said, what happened to you? Well, speak for yourself. She really looked embarrassed. So yes, true story. I got to meet the lady who owned the turkeys.
What made them drunk?
The mash had fermented in the hot Texas sun.
Oh, thank you.
So the mash had fermented and they had eaten, and it had turned to alcohol, and that's why they were so drunk that they didn't even wake up and play. And this last story came down from my Tennessee ancestor, Jesse Billingsley, who was at the Battle of San Jacinto in Texas on San Jacinto Day. He became quite a famous Texas hero. He's the one who said, "Remember the Alamo," it wasn't Sam Houston. Anyway, when he was a young man, he was in Tennessee, lived not far from Knoxville, and young men and young women didn't have too much opportunity to get together and meet each other to find a husband or a wife. So there would be a time when crops were kind of, getting ready for harvest, but it wasn't quite there yet, and there wasn't a whole lot to do. So it was a good time for a break and have a bar dance. And someone would bring a fiddle, and somebody would offer their barn for folks to sleep in or have a dance in or whatever, and they'd push the furniture aside, and people would come from miles around, and they'd sleep, in the wagons or wherever they could, and they'd stay for maybe a week, because it was a lot of trouble to make that trip, and they wanted to have a good time, and then it was time for work again. So they were having one of these dances, and being it was like, late August, it was hot. They didn't dance until it got, late in the evening when it would cool off, so people would rest in the afternoon when it was the heat of the day. Well, young ladies at the time didn't have perfume, and soap was hog-lard ashes, and it wasn't scented, so you didn't really smell all that nice when you just cleaned up, and especially after a night of dancing, you were going to perspire. Well, you didn't want to have anything come between you and the young man that you were, trying to attract. So what the girls would do is go out in their corselettes and pantaloons or whatever they were at that time during the nap time when people were resting, and they'd go out where they couldn't be seen, and there was usually a mint bed, maybe by the well or somewhere there was a little bit of water, and everybody had a mint bed because they loved men in the tea, even in those days. So they'd find the mint bed, and they'd be, where they couldn't be seen, and they're in their underwear, and they roll in the mint bed. Well, that gives them, a mint smell to cover up the perspiration of it. So that's what the girls did. And that evening, my ancestor, Jesse, he got to dance with his Miss Emily that he had his eye on, and they're waltzing around the room, and they're, dancing to the music, and he gets a little brazen, and he pulls her a little closer, and pretty soon he's sniffing, right by her ear. He's holding her so close, and she says, "Oh, you noticed I rolled in the mint bed before the dance." And he says, "Yes, Miss Emily, I did notice that, but I fear I need to tell you, well, I think the chickens roll there first." It's late, so I know y'all want to get home, so I'm not going to keep on telling stories, but if you want to see any of the DVDs and other things that I have for sale, they're on my website, which is wildcrafting.com, or you can Google Isla Hatter, and you can find me that way. But I do have, I have weather signs and portents, wildflower folklore, mountain kitchen. There's one that's wild edibles and medicinals of Appalachia, and in that one there are 6 30-minute videos, 3 of which were on folkways. Some of you probably have seen the folkway shows I did with David Holt on PBS, on UNC TV. So they're included in that set. So I will say goodnight, and I'll stay by the table for a little bit if somebody wants to take a look at the book. So thank you, Gary, for having me part of Liar's Bits. We've talked about it for a long time.